The night sky over Chicago was ablaze with orange and red as flames devoured the luxury apartment building in the heart of the city. Thick black smoke billowed into the air, casting an ominous shadow over the bustling streets below. The blaring sirens of fire trucks echoed through the chaos, their flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the surrounding. Ethan Cole tightened the straps of his oxygen mask, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced fires like this before, but each one brought its own challenges. Tonight was no different. The radio in his ear crackled with urgency. "Earl, we've got a confirmed person trapped on the top floor. Female, late 30s, name's Leila Monroe. She's the CEO of Monroe Designs." Ethan exhaled sharply. He had heard of Leila Monroe, the celebrated architect whose designs had redefined Chicago's skyline. She was a household name, known for her brilliance and poise. But now she was just another person in need of saving. "Copy that. Heading up now," Ethan responded, signaling to his team before charging into the inferno. Inside the building, the heat was suffocating, and visibility was almost non-existent. Flames licked at the walls, consuming everything in their path. Ethan moved quickly, his breathing steady despite the oppressive heat. His eyes scanned the corridors, searching for any sign of movement. On the top floor, Leila Monroe stood near the window of her penthouse, her face streaked with soot. She clutched a leather-bound sketchbook tightly to her chest, her knuckles white from the grip. The fire had spread too fast, trapping her before she could escape. Suddenly, the sound of splintering wood broke through the roar of the flames. Leila turned sharply to see Ethan stepping through the broken door, his figure silhouetted against the fiery backdrop. Relief flickered across her features, but fear still lingered in her eyes. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. Leila shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, but I don't think we can make it out." Ethan met her gaze, his confidence unwavering. "I promise we'll get out of here. Trust me." With one hand gently guiding her, Ethan led Leila into the smoke-filled corridor, the flames closing in around them. The corridor was a maze of fire and smoke, the air thick with heat and ash. Ethan kept his grip firm on Lila's arm, guiding her through the chaos. Every step was a battle against the flames that seemed to close in from all sides. The roar of the fire was deafening, but Ethan's voice cut through it like a lifeline. "Stay low and keep moving," he instructed, his tone calm but commanding. Leila clutched her sketchbook tightly, her heart racing as she followed Ethan. She had always been in control of her career, her life, her future, but now she was completely at the mercy of this stranger, a firefighter who seemed unfazed by the inferno around them. As they turned a corner, a section of the ceiling collapsed in front of them, sending a shower of sparks and debris into the air. Leila gasped, stumbling backward, but Ethan caught her before she could fall. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "I'm fine, just scared." Ethan gave her a reassuring look. "That's normal, but I need you to trust me. We're going to get out of here." He led her down another hallway, his movements quick and deliberate. The heat was unbearable, and Leila could feel the sweat dripping down her face, mixing with the soot. Her lungs burned with every breath, but she forced herself to keep going. They reached the stairwell, but the flames had already consumed most of it. The metal railings were glowing red-hot, and the steps were crumbling under the heat. Ethan paused, assessing the situation. "We can't go down this way," he muttered, more to himself than to Leila. "What do we do now?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. Ethan glanced at her, his expression steady. "We go up." "Up? Are you serious?" "There's a rooftop access point. If we can get to it, we can signal for help." Leila hesitated, but the determination in Ethan's eyes gave her the courage to nod. "Okay, let's do it." They climbed the remaining stairs, each step a test of endurance. The fire was relentless, and the building groaned under the strain of the heat. Lila's legs felt like they were made of lead, but Ethan's presence kept her moving. Finally, they reached the rooftop door. Ethan kicked it open, and the cool night air rushed in, a stark contrast to the inferno below. Lila stumbled onto the rooftop, gasping for breath. Ethan quickly assessed their surroundings. The fire had spread to the upper floors and the building was moments away from collapse. He grabbed his radio and called for backup. "This is Cole. I'm on the rooftop with one civilian. We need immediate extraction." The response crackled through the radio. "Copy that, Cole. Helicopter en route, ETA 2 minutes. Ethan turned to Lila, who was sitting on the ground, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. He crouched down beside her, his voice gentle. "You're doing great. Just a little longer, okay?" Lila looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. "I don't know how you do this. Running into fires, risking your life for people you don't even know." Ethan gave her a small smile. "It's not about who they are. It's about doing what's right. Everyone deserves a chance to make it out." Before Lila could respond, the sound of helicopter blades filled the air. A rescue team lowered a harness, and Ethan helped secure Lila into it. "You're going first," he said firmly. "What about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'll be right behind you, I promise." As the harness lifted her into the air, Lila kept her eyes on Ethan, watching as he prepared to follow. Moments later, he was hoisted up as well, just as the building began to collapse beneath them. The helicopter pulled away, the city lights stretching out below them. Lila looked at Ethan, who was sitting across from her, his face streaked with soot, but calm as ever. "You saved my life," she said softly. Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. "It's my job." But in that moment, Lila knew it was more than just a job to him. The next morning, the news of the fire dominated every major outlet in Chicago. Headlines read, "Heroic firefighter saves renowned architect Lila Monroe from deadly blaze." Photos of the collapsed building and a soot-covered Ethan Cole carrying Lila to safety were plastered across newspapers and social media. Lila sat in her hospital room, staring at the television as the news anchor recounted the events of the previous night. Her body ached, and her lungs still burned from the smoke, but she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had risked everything to save her. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her assistant, Claire, entered, holding a bouquet of flowers. "These just arrived," Claire said, setting them on the table, "and the press is asking for a statement. They want to know how you're doing." Lila sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'll make a statement later. Right now, I need some time." Claire hesitated before adding, "The firefighter who saved you, Ethan Cole, he's been getting a lot of attention too. The department is calling him a hero." Lila's lips curved into a small smile. "He is a hero." Later that day, Lila held a press conference outside the hospital. Cameras flashed as she stepped up to the podium, her voice steady despite the lingering exhaustion. "I want to thank the Chicago Fire Department for their incredible bravery," she began. "And I especially want to thank Ethan Cole, the firefighter who saved my life. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today." Ethan watched the press conference from the back of the crowd, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't one for the spotlight, and the attention made him uncomfortable. But hearing Lila's words brought a small sense of pride. After the event, Lila spotted Ethan lingering near one of the fire trucks. She excused herself from the reporters and made her way over to him. "You're not much for the cameras, are you?" she teased, a faint smile on her lips. Ethan shrugged. "Not really my thing." "Well, I wanted to thank you in person," Lila said, her tone softening. "You didn't just save my life, you gave me a second chance." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm just glad you're okay." There was a brief pause before Lila spoke again. "How about I buy you a coffee? It's the least I can do." Ethan hesitated, but something in her eyes made him relent. "All right, but only if it's good coffee." At the small cafe down the street, the two sat across from each other, the chaos of the past 24 hours finally giving way to a quiet moment. Lila began, stirring her coffee. "How long have you been a firefighter?" "About 8 years," Ethan replied. "I joined after my dad passed away. He was a firefighter too." Lila's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." Ethan shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. It's okay. He loved what he did. I guess I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And you're good at it, Leela said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Ethan chuckled. I just do my job. What about you? You're Lila Monroe, the architect everyone talks about. What's that like? Lila hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. It's a lot. People think it's glamorous, but the pressure is overwhelming. Everyone expects perfection, and sometimes I feel like I'm just stuck. Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking. You don't seem like the kind of person who lets anything hold you back. Lila smiled faintly. Maybe, but last night I realized how fragile everything is. One moment you're on top of the world, and the next, it's all gone. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. That's why you have to hold on to what really matters. Their conversation lingered, the connection between them growing stronger with every word. Despite their vastly different lives, there was an unspoken understanding, a bond forged in the fire. Over the next few weeks, Lila and Ethan found themselves crossing paths more often than either of them had expected, or perhaps wanted to admit. It started with a simple thank you dinner that Lila insisted on hosting for Ethan and his firehouse crew. The dinner was held at a trendy restaurant downtown, and while Ethan appreciated the gesture, he couldn't help but feel out of place among the polished decor and the well-dressed crowd. Fancy place, Ethan muttered to one of his colleagues as they sat at the long table. Lila, seated at the head of the table, caught his comment and smiled. I thought you deserved something special. You saved my life, after all. Ethan gave her a small nod, but his discomfort was evident. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and the spotlight made him uneasy. After the dinner, as the other firefighters left, Lila lingered behind with Ethan. They stood outside the restaurant, the city lights casting a warm glow around them. Thank you for coming, Lila said, her voice softer now. I know this isn't really your scene. Ethan shrugged. It's not about the scene, it's about the people. Your team seems nice. Lila smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. They are, but sometimes I feel like I don't really belong in my own world. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. What do you mean? She hesitated, then sighed. Everyone sees me as this successful architect, this CEO who has it all together, but the truth is, I'm constantly under pressure to be perfect, to keep the company running, to meet everyone's expectations. It's exhausting. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Sounds like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. I am, Lila admitted. And sometimes, I wonder if it's worth it. Ethan's gaze softened. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Lila. You've already done more than most people ever will. His words lingered in the air, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt seen not as the CEO or the architect, but as a person. A few days later, Ethan invited Lila to visit his fire station. She arrived in a sleek black car, her usual polished appearance slightly out of place among the gritty, practical surroundings. Welcome to my world, Ethan said with a grin as he greeted her. Lila looked around, taking in the fire trucks, the gear, and the camaraderie among the firefighters. It's different, she said, smiling. Ethan chuckled. That's one way to put it. Come on, I'll show you around. As he led her through the station, Lila couldn't help but notice how at ease Ethan was here. This was his world, a world of teamwork, bravery, and simplicity. It was so different from her own, yet there was something comforting about it. At one point, Ethan introduced her to his crew, who immediately started teasing him. Oh, this is the famous Leela Monroe, one of them said with a grin. Ethan's been talking about you non-stop. Ethan shot his colleague a warning look, but Lila just laughed. Well, I hope he's been saying good things. The visit ended with Lila sitting on the back of a fire truck, sharing a cup of coffee with Ethan. You seem happy here, she said, glancing at him. I am, Ethan replied. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And I like knowing I'm making a difference. Layla nodded, her expression thoughtful. I envy that. My world feels so complicated sometimes. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. Maybe it doesn't have to be. As the days turned into weeks, Lila and Ethan grew closer. They started meeting for coffee, sharing stories about their lives and finding comfort in each other's company. But as their connection deepened, so did the challenges. Lila's world was one of high expectations and constant scrutiny. Her board of directors began to notice her growing relationship with Ethan, and whispers of disapproval started to circulate. Lila, you need to be careful, one of her board members warned during a meeting. Your image is everything. Associating with someone like him, it could hurt the company. Lila bristled at the comment but said nothing. She hated how shallow her world could be, but she also knew how much was at stake. Meanwhile, Ethan was starting to feel the weight of their differences too. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet diner, he voiced his concerns. Leela, I don't know if I fit into your world, he admitted. I'm just a firefighter. You're you. Lila reached across the table, taking his hand. Ethan, I don't care about any of that. You're the only person who makes me feel like I can just be myself. Her words were sincere, but the challenges they faced were undeniable. Their worlds were so different, and the pressure was mounting. The whispers of disapproval in Lila's world grew louder. The tabloids had caught wind of her relationship with Ethan, and soon headlines like "Architect to the Stars Dating a Firefighter," "Scandal or Romance" began circulating. Paparazzi followed her every move, snapping photos of her and Ethan during their quiet coffee dates or casual walks. At first, Lila tried to ignore it. She had dealt with media attention before, but this time, it felt different. The scrutiny wasn't just about her, it was about Ethan too. And while she could handle the pressure, she worried about how it might affect him. The breaking point came during a board meeting at Monroe Designs. Lila sat at the head of the long, polished table, surrounded by her team of executives. Leila, one of the senior board members began, his tone measured but firm. We've been monitoring the media coverage surrounding your personal life. While we respect your privacy, this relationship is becoming a distraction. Lila's jaw tightened. A distraction? Yes, another board member chimed in. Your association with someone outside of our circle could damage the company's image. Investors are starting to ask questions. Lila's hands clenched into fists under the table. Ethan is a firefighter. He saves lives. How is that a problem? The first board member sighed. It's not about him personally. It's about perception. You've built a brand of sophistication and exclusivity. This relationship doesn't align with that image. Lila felt a wave of anger and frustration rise within her. She wanted to defend Ethan, to tell them how wrong they were, but she also knew how much was at stake. Her company, her employees, her reputation, it all hung in the balance. Meanwhile, Ethan was feeling the strain in his own way. The media attention was something he had never experienced before, and it made him deeply uncomfortable. Reporters had started showing up at the fire station, asking invasive questions about his relationship with Lila. One evening, after a long shift, Ethan sat in his small apartment, scrolling through his phone. He came across an article that dissected every detail of his life, his modest upbringing, his career as a firefighter, even his late father's legacy. He tossed the phone onto the couch, frustration bubbling to the surface. This wasn't what he had signed up for. When Leela showed up at his door later that night, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She stepped inside, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a quiet vulnerability. "Rough day?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. Leela nodded, sinking onto the couch. "The board thinks I should end things with you. They're worried about the company's image." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Of course they are. I'm not good enough for their world, right?" "That's not what I said," Lila replied quickly. "You didn't have to," Ethan said, his tone sharper than he intended. "I see the way people look at me when I'm with you, like I don't belong." Leela reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing up and pacing the room. Ethan, I don't care about what they think. I care about you. But it's not just about you, Leela, Ethan said, his voice rising. Your world it's so different from mine. I'm just a firefighter. I don't fit into your life, and I never will. Lila stood, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Don't say that. You mean more to me than any of this. Ethan shook his head, his expression pained. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. You deserve someone who fits into your world, not someone who complicates it. Lila's voice broke as she whispered, You're not a complication, Ethan. You're the only thing that feels real. But Ethan had already made up his mind. He stepped closer, his voice softening. I care about you, Lila, but maybe we're just too different. Lila's heart shattered as she watched him walk to the door. Ethan, please. He turned back, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry. And with that, he was gone. The days that followed were some of the hardest Lila had ever faced. She threw herself into her work, trying to drown out the ache in her chest. But no matter how many meetings she attended or designs she sketched, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Ethan, too, struggled to move on. He buried himself in his work at the fire station, taking on extra shifts to keep his mind occupied. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lila's face, heard her voice, and felt the weight of what he had walked away from. They were both trying to convince themselves that they had made the right decision, but deep down, they knew the truth. They were incomplete without each other. Leela sat alone in her penthouse, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sketchbook she had clung to during the fire lay open on the coffee table, its pages filled with half-finished designs. But tonight, she couldn't bring herself to work. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of Ethan, his steady voice, his calm presence, and the way he had made her feel like she could finally breathe. Her best friend and confidant, Claire, arrived unannounced, carrying a bottle of wine and a concerned expression. You've been avoiding me, Claire said, setting the bottle down and plopping onto the couch beside Lila. I've been busy, Leela replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Claire raised an eyebrow. Busy pretending you're okay? Because you're not. And I know it's about Ethan. Lila sighed, leaning back against the couch. It's not just about him. It's everything. The board, the media, the pressure to be perfect all the time. They think I should end things with him, and maybe they're right. Claire frowned. Do you really believe that, or are you just scared? Leela hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook. I don't know. I've worked so hard to build this life, Claire. What if I lose it all? Claire leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. Lila, you've spent your whole life trying to meet everyone else's expectations, but what about what you want? Do you love him? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Lila didn't answer. Then, quietly, she said, Yes, I do. Claire smiled softly. Then fight for him, because if you don't, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Meanwhile, Ethan was at the fire station, finishing up another grueling shift. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. His colleagues had noticed the change in him. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and seemed to be carrying a weight he couldn't shake. As he sat in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, his captain walked in and took a seat across from him. You've been off lately, the captain said, his tone gentle but direct. Ethan shrugged. Just tired, I guess. The captain studied him for a moment before speaking again. You know, this job teaches us to put others first, to sacrifice. But sometimes you have to ask yourself what's worth fighting for, what's worth risking everything for. Ethan looked up, his captain's words hitting him harder than he expected. The next morning, Lila made her decision. She called an emergency meeting with her board of directors, her heart pounding as she stood at the head of the table. I've heard your concerns, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "And I understand that my personal life has become a topic of discussion, but let me make one thing clear. I will not let anyone dictate who I can or cannot love." The room fell silent, the board members exchanging uneasy glances. Lila continued, her confidence growing. "Ethan Cole is a firefighter. He's brave, selfless, and one of the most genuine people I've ever met. If that's not good enough for this company's image, then maybe I'm not the right person to lead it." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Then one of the younger board members broke the silence. "I think it's admirable," she said. "And honestly, it's about time we focused on what really matters, integrity, not appearances." One by one, the other board members reluctantly nodded in agreement. Later that evening, Leela arrived at the fire station, her heart racing as she stepped through the doors. The familiar smell of smoke and metal filled the air, and she spotted Ethan across the room, talking to one of his colleagues. When he turned and saw her, his expression shifted from surprise to something softer, something hopeful. "Leela," he said, walking toward her, "what are you doing here?" She took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm here because I made a mistake. I let other people's opinions get in the way of what I really want. And what I want is you." Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding. "Lila, She cut him off, stepping closer. "I don't care about the media, or the board, or any of it. You're the only person who makes me feel like I can just be myself. And I'm not going to let you go." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to hear that." Lila smiled back, tears glistening in her eyes. "So, are you going to make me say it again, or are you going to kiss me?" Ethan didn't need to be told twice. The kiss was everything they had both been holding back. Weeks of longing, frustration, and unspoken feelings poured into that one moment. The fire station around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against Lila's, a soft smile on his lips. "You really don't care about all the noise?" he asked, his voice low but filled with hope. Lila shook her head, her hand still resting on his chest. "I care about you, Ethan. That's all that matters." Ethan chuckled softly. "You're stubborn, you know that? And you're just figuring that out now?" Lila teased, her smile widening. Their moment was interrupted by a loud cheer from Ethan's colleagues, who had been watching from a distance. "About time," one of them called out, and the others laughed and clapped. Lila blushed, but Ethan just grinned. "Guess we're not keeping this a secret anymore." The days that followed were a whirlwind, but this time, Lila and Ethan faced everything together. The media frenzy didn't die down, but Lila handled it with grace, refusing to let the tabloids dictate her life. She gave a heartfelt interview to a major news outlet, where she spoke openly about her relationship with Ethan. "Ethan Cole is one of the bravest, most selfless people I've ever met," she said during the interview. "He saved my life, but more than that, he showed me what it means to truly live. I'm proud to stand by his side." The public response was overwhelmingly positive. People admired Lila's honesty and Ethan's heroism, and the narrative began to shift. Instead of criticizing their relationship, the media started celebrating it as a story of love overcoming differences. Even the board of Monroe Designs eventually came around. Lila's bold stance had earned her respect, and the company's reputation remained intact. In fact, her story brought a wave of positive attention to the firm, with clients praising her authenticity and strength. For Ethan, life didn't change much at the fire station, but he didn't mind. He loved his job and the simplicity of his world. What did change, however, was the way he felt about himself. Lila's unwavering support and belief in him gave him a newfound confidence. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of Lila's penthouse watching the city lights twinkle below, Ethan turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he began, "I never thought I'd end up here, with you." Lila smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. And I never thought I'd find someone who makes me feel like I can finally let go of all the pressure. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. You've got nothing to prove, Lila. Not to me, not to anyone. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. And you've got nothing to prove either. You're more than enough, Ethan. Always. Months passed, and their relationship only grew stronger. They found ways to balance their vastly different worlds, supporting each other through every challenge. Leela started spending more time at the fire station, getting to know Ethan's crew and even helping organize a fundraiser for new equipment. Ethan, in turn, became a quiet but steady presence in Lila's corporate world. He attended events by her side, always staying in the background but offering her the grounding support she needed. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the park, Ethan suddenly stopped. "What is it?" Leela asked, turning to face him. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Lila's breath caught as he dropped to one knee. "Layla Monroe," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You came into my life when I least expected it. You've shown me what it means to love and be loved, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Lila's eyes as she nodded, a radiant smile spreading across her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and as they kissed, the world around them seemed to disappear once again. Their wedding was a beautiful blend of their two worlds. Held at a picturesque outdoor venue, it was simple yet elegant, with touches of Leela's sophisticated style and Ethan's down-to-earth charm. Firefighters in their dress uniforms stood alongside Leela's corporate colleagues, a testament to the love that had brought two very different lives together. As they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. "I promise to stand by your side no matter what," Lila said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You've shown me what it means to truly live, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you." Ethan smiled, his own voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love you for who you are, not for what the world expects you to be. You're my partner, my best friend, and my home." The story of Lila and Ethan became one that people talked about for years, a story of love, courage, and the power of staying true to yourself. And as they danced under the stars that night, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Lila and Ethan knew one thing for certain. They had found their forever. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales about love, life, and the unexpected moments that bring us together. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.